Andrew Thomas goes down with a season-ending injury. Some positives on the Malik Neighbors front, and what Saquon Barkley thinks about that Giants return this week. We dive in next. Yes, my friends, it is the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your host over here, Adam Arbrecht, over there, Andrew Makowitz. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're wise, which cannot be said for the New York Football Giants right now, who, unfortunately, coming out of that last game, that disappointing, frustrating, offensively embarrassing loss to the Cincinnati Bengals at home, Andrew Thomas down with an injury. The foot, will go into the specifics of the injury and at least what is the projected timeline for recovery. Has already had surgery as of Wednesday morning. But Andy, this is the kind of thing you can't afford to do. You can't afford to lose some of these absolutely critical pieces. I'll ask the question right off the top. Losing Andrew Thomas has to be, in my mind, the most devastating possible injury for this roster in totality. Do you agree?
You know what's funny is if you didn't ask me that question, I was going to say, is Andrew Thomas the most indispensable piece on the Giants that you cannot lose? So you and me are literally of the same mindset. Adam, there is a very, very short list of players on the New York Giants that have a material impact to whether this team can win or lose games. I look at a guy like Dexter Lawrence on the defensive side of the ball because of his game wrecking ability up the middle and how good he is, but also what's behind him is also an issue. Like, we're already thin on the defensive line. Sure. So I look at Dexter Lawrence as one of the most indispensable pieces of the Giants. When you look at Dexter Lawrence, you say the exact same thing about Andrew Thomas on the offensive side of the ball. So to me, the two most important players are Dexter Lawrence, Andrew Thomas. I'd say third might even actually be Brian Burns, who also is dinged up and has some groin injuries himself. So Andrew Thomas is so important to the success of the Giants because he plays one of the most important positions in football. Now, this is a tough one. We obviously saw him struggle against the Cincinnati Bengals a little bit out there. He was laboring. He didn't seem as spry and quick. We come to find out it's not the hamstring injury that he's had before. It's not necessarily the ankle injury. It's the Lisfranc injury, which is kind of a handline fracture. You'll talk about the timelines in a moment on that. But Adam, you're 100% right. Andrew Thomas is the one guy, and the offensive line has looked like a strength rather than a weakness. And we take away our arguably one of our best players from that area of strength. This is crippling for the Giants. This is DEFCON 5, ring the alarm bells. Like, you cannot lose him. Even if you lost Daniel Jones for 5 games, you'd be like, well, if we could run the football, we could throw some screen passes. Like, the offense isn't humming along anyway. I am genuinely concerned about the sack rate, the turnovers, and what this is actually going to do to the football team. I see you nodding. I'm sure you agree with me on this one.
Yeah, for all those listening, I'm nodding. I'm nodding along to Andrew Makowitz as he works his way through it. Yeah, 100%. It's we said this the other day. I mean, there's at the very high level, when you lose a close game against the Cincinnati Bengals, close game being a relative term, you lost by 10 points, a game you felt like you could have won. You think about the Washington game and all this stuff, and we keep saying, but you can move along here, and we'll talk later in the week about the Eagles and what that matchup looks like and how they've been dysfunctional this season as well. But you always had, well, because the offensive line looks good. You have Andrew Thomas there. You've had pretty good running opportunities. Some players are stepping up defensively. You keep going through that list, but then if you pluck away a couple of guys, and by the way, you can put this inside of basically a 1-week stretch where Kayvon Thibodeau has gone down, and now Andrew Thomas has gone down. And while Thibodeau, I think Burns obviously has taken over as one of the most important or critical players there, as you mentioned with Dexter Lawrence on the defensive side, Thibodeau's right in that room, right? And even though Azeez Ojulari filled in admirably, you have to think about the long-term impact. There's no replacing Andrew Thomas for the New York Football Giants. Most teams cannot replace a number 1 starting left tackle, a Pro Bowl, caliber left tackle. You end up having to mix and match. And we're going to talk about what's the best option here, maybe for the New York Football Giants, and the return of a surprising name in one Evan Neal that could get back into the mix potentially. But just to clarify on the Lisfranc injury and surgery for Andrew Thomas, the timeline, generally speaking, it's like you got improvements occurring within the first 6 months. Now, more specifically, non-weight bearing, 6 to 8 weeks after surgery. Cast or boot, that's going to be an additional 4 to 6 weeks. Transition to a shoe, something around 10 to 14 weeks from the initial injury. Physical therapy, that's going to take place after that. 3 months has been the general speculated timeline about like when he'll be at some point of starting to reevaluate or assess him. I'm not a genius here, Andrew, but it's mid-October, almost late October. That's late November, late December, late January. And last time I checked, regular season football is no longer being played at that point. So Andrew Thomas is done for the year. And it is brutal. It's interesting. Somebody put up, I don't know if they intended this to be as some type of like shot at Andrew Thomas, that he talked about the contract and having that security and foot injuries, which he's dealt with. The only thing I'll ask, because right now, as you know, it is in sports, it's next man up mentality. There is no next man up to replace him, but what are the Giants going to do? That's what matters most right now. I will just ask you, is there any back of mind concern around Andrew Thomas's health overall? Because that has been a part of his young career narrative. He's obviously a very good player. He's obviously been anchoring that offensive line. And also, he's obviously had issues specifically around his feet and ankle area almost every single year of his career.
This is obviously, listen, I don't begrudge Andrew Thomas for saying exactly what he did. The whole
Of
point is
course
like,
not. Yeah, I know. I
like,
don't want to like get derailed on that, but I was like, yeah, well, if everyone's going to say that, that's the nature of the NFL in this sport, right?
but also like Andrew Thomas was kind of explaining why he took the deal that he did. He wasn't
Yes, the
saying
lower
I took
cost.
money now. He could have held out and said, I want to be the highest paid left tackle because it's my turn to be up. What he said was, no, I value security and being here. And like, look, I play a violent sport. Like, I'll just take the 100 million that they're offering me now. I don't need to hold out and risk for 120 guaranteed
Yeah.
$1 million like that. So we'll put that off to the side. It is a concern, Adam. It has to be a concern. I believe it was Art Stapleton. It might have been Dan Duggan, but I think since he signed his deal, if he is out for the year, he will now have missed. He will only have played in 18 of 34 games since he signed the contract. This is why you sign the contract if you're Andrew Thomas, because when you play, you are amazing and you are that important to the team. When you
Yeah.
don't play and you get these injuries, you need the protections and guarantees around it. So the short is like, I don't begrudge, and I don't. I know you don't either. Like, take the money when you get it. This is how it all works. But it is a concerning trend. And Adam, it's because it's all like leg related injuries, right? It's
Yeah.
not like, oh, he broke his collarbone here. Oh, he had his elbow pop out on a weird thing. Oh, he got rolled up on that one time. And like all of them, you can kind of write off to something. We're talking about like ankle, foot, hamstring esque type things are all related to his legs. And for a position like the left tackle position that is so important about movement, and even to Andrew Thomas's point, there's so many bodies on the ground rolling around that are 300, 400-pound men right by your legs. Like,
Of
this
course.
could very easily happen again. And the fact that he's injured it once or twice, you can see it happening again. So the answer is it a concern? Absolutely. But what are the Giants supposed to do? He is one of your most valuable assets when he is out there. And like, this is just the roll of the dice and the risk that you run.
Let's talk about replacing Andrew Thomas, Andrew Makowitz. Just because you have the same name doesn't mean you can get on the field for them. Although, if they host tryouts, I think you should certainly put your hat in the ring. Middle to late 30s, just about to hit their athletic prime. There's always opportunities there. One of the big things that we talked about, though, early in this season, and it continued all the way through this past game against the Cincinnati Bengals, is that every single starter across that line played 100% of the snaps through 6 weeks of the season. Per lineups.com, Andrew Thomas grades out as an 88 on the line. Now you move down, rate in order. Greg Van Roten, you're going to put him at 75. You're going to put Jermaine Illuminor at 73. This is not in order. They put it out of order. They're ranking it by ratings, not by lineup. John Runyon Jr., a 76. And then you get into John Michael Schmitz at center is graded as a 69. And then you get into only in the instances when they've had a extra offensive lineman there, which comes down to 3 total snaps for Joshua Ezeudu, over the last 2 games. 2 in week 5, 1 in week 2. This is the concern here. Whether or not I test and otherwise, and the line overall has played pretty well. The bottom line is that nobody across this line is at the caliber of player that Andrew Thomas is. And we'll talk about replacing him. But regardless of replacing him, I don't think you can just look across the line and say, Okay, John Runyon Jr., you now become the anchor of this unit, right? John Michael Schmitz in year number 2. No, you just want to see him continue to develop well. Maybe Illuminor, who's by the way, has his local spots on the radio stations. Like, he seems to have been a big personality and who was excited to come and join the New York Football Giants. But this is where we get into the pivot. What is the replacement here? In your mind, because I think this is what's going to be speculated, we have a couple things. Illuminor, they said, well, they could swing him around to left tackle. They could choose to keep him at right tackle. And then the most immediate options are Ezeudu and Evan Neal. Those are the only 2 players currently on this roster. We've heard people say Tyree Phillips, he's not ready to play physically right now from what we understand. What do you do here if you're the New York Football Giants? If Andy is the offensive coach, if you're Brian Dable, are you swinging Illuminor out to the left side because you need to have something you think you can trust to protect Daniel Jones' blind side? Or do you not want to mess with what you have right now at 4 other positions and players that have been working with one another now for 6 weeks?
Yeah, so this is a very, very difficult situation. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't envy Brian Dable. I don't envy Carmen Brasillo. I don't envy the people that are going to have to make these choices, because it feels like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, right? So Dan Duggan put out, in his opinion, the pecking order and the depth chart in which the Giants have it is that Joshua Ezeudu is the next man up. That in jumbo packages, in these 4th down goal line packages, he was the one that was coming out. He's listed on the unofficial depth charts as the backup, tackle in those positions. And so Ezeudu seems like he's going to get the first crack. But Adam, between you and I don't think anyone's listening to us, right? Between you and I, like, does Joshua Ezeudu give you more of a worry playing the tackle position than Evan Neal does right now? Because we feel like Ezeudu has kind of gotten a pass because he's been played at guard and tackle. He wasn't a highly as touted of a draft pick, but like in his limited snaps at the tackle position, he has looked completely overwhelmed. Evan Neal looks like he's missing blocks and he's whiffing, and like there might be some technical issues with his feet. It just looks to me like Ezeudu is not suited to play a tackle spot, yet the Giants continue to insist that that is probably his best position. So, like, which one do you feel more concerned about, even whether it's left tackle or right tackle getting on the field?
No, well, I mean, the concern is just the position overall, I mean, frankly, right? But I again, at least in this moment, now you can talk about pedigree and right and draft stock and what we thought was going to be for Evan Neal as a New York Football Giant, certainly. But the fact that we're 6 weeks through the season and that Joshua Ezeudu is the first man up behind Thomas, behind Illuminor, that tells me everything I need to know. Like, now that's separate from whether or not I'm confident in Ezeudu's ability to go out and play left tackle or right tackle. But it tells me that they have no confidence in Evan Neal, that whatever they tried to work on in the background has not been effective. Now, what I think would be interesting here is, because I actually have what might be the real solution to this problem for the New York Football Giants in the short term over the rest of the season. My theory is you've been working with Ezeudu. That's what the preseason looked like. Some decent samples, sometimes some bad ones for him, obviously, over the course of it. The idea is we have been developing and believe in Ezeudu. He's going to get first crack. Now, that's a little bit of a safety valve, because let's say Ezeudu struggles. He wasn't a first-round pick. He wasn't maybe supposed to be playing at tackle for the New York Football Giants. Okay, if he struggles, then there's probably a zero pressure opportunity for Evan Neal to come into a game, maybe midway through or after this upcoming week, and give him a chance to fill that role. Now, just because there's no pressure, it doesn't mean Evan Neal is going to perform any better than he has before. We talked about this in the offseason. People have said, well, swing him around to the other tackle or kick him into guard, right? That was always it. Okay, maybe he would play better at guard, but guess what? We don't need help at guard right now. We need help at the tackle position. And short of really shaking up this offensive line and playing total musical chairs, I think it's just 1-to-1. Ezeudu come in, try to play respectably, like try to be solid enough. And then we get into the other conversation, which is looking at the snap counts for tight ends and how this may shift if you need to have that extra pure blocker to help on that left side of the line going forward.
Okay, so I have a different take on this, and this may be just a different.
Gotta be different.
This just might be the different talk track or different thought process. But tell me how this lands for you.
It doesn't.
you're like,
sorry.
You
talk first, and then I say it doesn't land. Yeah.
Listen, Carmen Brasillo was brought in here to improve the offensive line, right?
That's right.
And so far, it looks like he has dramatically improved the offensive line play
You better believe it.
across the board. Now, some of those were free agents that were signed, but also like I don't think Jermaine Illuminor gave up 0 sacks in his first 5 or 6 games with the Las Vegas Raiders, but it seems like he's getting continuity and consistency with Brasillo as they continue to grow and mature together. You look at
Mhm.
John Michael Schmitz, he's having a much better season this year than he did last season. I believe that you have to put Evan Neal at the left tackle position. And you have to say, Carmen Brasillo, have you been able to do enough where he is a serviceable player? Adam, the reason why I say this is it's very simple. I don't believe the Giants can function if Joshua Ezeudu is either the right or left tackle for the rest of the year. I kind of
But
think
why?
the
Yeah,
same.
but why do you think that? Like, so because I get where you're coming from, and I think we might both agree too. By the way, maybe a caveat here is like you can swing Illuminor around to left tackle and then put one of those, whether it's Neal or Ezeudu, you could put him right
Sure,
tackle if you wanted to. We might say just stick with what you have and then add that piece. But
sure.
why are you more nothing about the sample size on Evan Neal suggests that he is even improved. Even just improved. I'm not talking about whether or not the pedigree is always there. First round draft pick. So you always believe there's something there. And I get it. Brasillo's been brought in. So even in the background, have you been working? Has he been improving? But why do you go to, even if you don't think Ezeudu is best suited for it? I can make the case that under Brasillo, the reason why Ezeudu was first on the depth chart is because he's shown improvement, because they do have some confidence in him. Whether or not we agree with it, they have some level of confidence in him. So wouldn't it be, it just feels like, and maybe you're right, you could be right here, but it would feel counterintuitive to look at the sample size since Brasillo came in, have all the depth charts and all the things indicate that Ezeudu is ahead of Neal on the depth chart, and then make the pivot to Evan Neal in this spot when you need it. By the way, starting left tackle, and we know there's some history there with him going back to college.
Yes. So the reason why I say that is because I still believe that
I still believe.
if it was purely coaching
Mhm.
that was holding Evan Neal back, that made Joshua Ezeudu look overwhelmed, if it was just coaching,
Mhm.
then I believe that Evan Neal has more upside if the coach is able to fix whatever mistakes are able to happen. So for me, I look at it like if Ezeudu and Neal play the same way that they played last season, then the Giants will not be able to function as an offense. It will even look progressively worse than it has, and that the Giants are not going to amount to anything this season. So for me, I think if the coaching can really impact things as much as we hope they can, and we say a new coach gives them a fresh start, to
Mhm.
me, because of how well Evan Neal looked in college, how big and strong and like forceful we feel like he could have been coming out of college, that
Mhm.
there's still something maybe there. And definitively, I think if you look and Carmen Brasillo can't fix any of these mistakes that Evan Neal has, and it's either between the ears or his feet don't move fast enough, whatever it's going to be, then at least you can 100% definitively move on from Evan Neal and not feel like you're eliminating the upside that his pedigree coming out of the draft brought. So for me, I look at it like you're kind of hosed if you go with Ezeudu or Neal if they play the same way they played last year. If coaching matters, Neal gives you the better upside. Imagine if all of a sudden, under Carmen Brasillo, Evan Neal looks like a competent tackle. All of a sudden, you'd look and say, well, at least our prognosis moving forward, if Evan Neal ends up getting hurt again or Jermaine Illuminor is only on a 1-year deal, then you at least have a swing tackle or a contingency plan. Right now, I just don't believe that Joshua Ezeudu will ever be that for the Giants.
Okay, but there's absolutely nothing to suggest that Ezeudu is less capable of being that than Evan Neal is right now. So I
Well,
agree with you.
they
I agree
both
with
have
the upside.
struggled in the NFL. One
So
was a
totally, yeah, totally. But one guy was a first round draft pick who had all the pedigree attached to him and has only struggled in the NFL. The other player is a mid round pick that has shown developmental growth, albeit still while struggling at the NFL level. But you've at least seen that, and I get your point. It's like, well, you never had a time when you thought the offensive line coach was in a good position to help develop these guys, and also I've already seen this year that John Michael Schmitz looks better. Like, so I've already
yes.
gone through the rigmarole of like players looking better. So at that point, again, I there's a part of me that agrees with you that you go ahead, you throw Evan Neal in. So if he looks like trash, you go, great, we're all done here. We can move on.
Done.
And maybe I think most
Wipe the
fans might
slate
say,
clean, right? Like that's to me what
totally.
like you clear. Like, then you trade him, release him, do whatever you want. But if you truly believe that the offensive line coach was a challenge for the Giants, and you think that John Michael Schmitz's progression is partly due to Carmen Bracillo, then I think I truly believe that if they max out the potentials of their body, I think Evan Neal can be a better player than Joshua
No, of
Ezeudu
course, yeah,
at
yeah,
the
yeah.
tackle
But that's,
spot,
yeah,
right?
100%. Like, yes, on paper, 100%. Evan Neal offers the better upside. Again, I totally agree with that. It's just you may end up being right. They may go with him, but I'm only looking at what I've learned since these players have been drafted and what I've seen from the practices, from the reports, from everything else. The injuries are included in that, by the way, for Evan Neal and his ability to be healthy enough to go out there and perform. He had opportunities. He couldn't get on the field for reps even
I
once he
know.
was cleared and healthy in the preseason to show that he might be capable of something. And for whatever it is worth, just to really put this into context about why this is a problem for the New York Football Giants, no matter what they choose to do, when you look at a player like Evan Neal last season, he had 460 snaps on the offensive line for the Giants, took 5 penalties, he had 2 sacks allowed, and graded out as a 39.8 on PFF. By the way, Josh Ezeudu, not much fancier, 42.4, only 266 reps, 6 penalties taken, 5 sacks allowed. And remember, we talk about he kind of got shuffled around a little bit there as well. So it is interesting, man. No matter what, none of this is a good decision to have to make right now for the Giants when it comes to losing Andrew Thomas and what it means for this season. Go ahead.
One last note on this one, and we'll talk about the season impact that this is going to have,
Yeah.
Adam, is it's funny because as I sit here and I think about it, I agree with you and I also agree with myself because
Yeah.
both of these two things can be true. If I was playing quarterback and I did not want to get absolutely destroyed in this one upcoming game, I would prefer Joshua Ezeudu over Evan Neal. If I am
Yes.
the Giants
Oh, that's a
organization
good way
and
to
I
frame
look
it.
at
Yeah.
drafts and investment and like what players could be, and I'm thinking about more than one game and what it could mean for the roster, I play Evan Neal. So I don't know if you feel the same way, but both of those things I feel like can be true. That maybe Evan Neal gives you like there's a chance that Evan Neal could be great longer term if you give him more runway, whereas Joshua Ezeudu I think is more prepared right now to protect Daniel Jones.
Yes, I do agree with you in that regard. And the Giants have tried to stand on principle, play well, get reps. And
Yeah.
if that's the barometer, then Ezeudu might very well be the guy. The other part of this is what does it mean for the season? Giants come off losing a game to the Cincinnati Bengals, and we're all disgusted by the fact that they only amassed 7 points. We talked about how Daniel Jones is a big factor inside of that and what it's meant to not maybe have a player like Malik Neighbors, who, by the way, is progressing through the concussion protocol and seems like is as close as he's ever been and maybe will be available this week against the Eagles. When you're 2-4 and the defense has been playing really well and you've seen some flashes on offense and you scored 29 points against Seattle, we have been trying or willing to paint a picture. Like, hey, Eagles haven't been that good this year. Like, come on, let's give it a shot. Russell Wilson's now maybe going to start for Pittsburgh. We'll go and visit you guys and try to take you to task. It's felt like there's been an ebb and flow where it hasn't always gone perfectly, but the Giants can still win some football games. How damaging does it feel that the Giants are 2-4 and losing Andrew Thomas relative to the rest of the season?
Well, you just have no margin for error, right? Like if you think that this team can be anything for the season, like you needed to get off to a good start. You had to win those games that you feel like could have gone either way. Not saying the Giants should have won them, but a
All right,
couple
but
of these
good.
games hung in the balance where like a player or two here or there, the razor thin margins of the NFL showed that the Giants, there's a scenario where the Giants are 4-2 instead of 2-4, and an Andrew Thomas injury, maybe you'd say, let's go out into the free agent market and let's shore this up because we think we could still make the playoffs. Maybe David Bakhtiari wants to hang out with Aaron Rodgers on the weekends, and maybe he'll play for the Giants at left tackle, right? Like there's a world where you think about the other scenario where if you're 4-2, you probably make more moves on the market to
Yeah, be
patch
more
up the
aggressive, be
wall.
more willing to really go for it. Yeah.
Right. It's why you see the Buffalo Bills trade for Amari Cooper. I don't know why the Jets are trading for Devontae Adams, but it's like if you think that you're still in this thing, you would make short-term moves and kind of like give away long-term success or long-term draft capital. For me, Adam, the fact that they're 2-4, I think Joe Shane and Brian Dable have to say, for the next couple of weeks, you guys got what you got, and we got to make the best of it. And if we happen to fall into a couple of wins and Malik Neighbors comes back and looks amazing, or Daniel Jones plays out of his mind, or the defense holds Pittsburgh to 7 points and we win a game 10-7, like then all of a
Sure.
sudden, if you're 4-4 and you're like, what's going to be the wild card to get in? Do we make changes there? But I think between the next couple of weeks, it will be very telling. Like the Giants have to deal with the roster that they have currently constructed, and they have to find a way to get up around this hill in order for Joe Schoen to have any thoughts about what the rest of the season could look like.
And obviously, when we talk about what will the season look like, Andy pulled this up in the background before we started today. Daniel Jones with and without Andrew Thomas since 2021. Well, with him, 212 yards per game, 27 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, a 6.9% sack rate. Without, 162 yards per game, so it's just 50 less. It's fine. That's not a big deal. Just 25%. 6 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, and a 10.6% sack rate. Now, the positive here is that the offensive line in totality is far better this season than it has been since 2021. So you'd like to think that you can play a little bit closer, right? I don't think it's going to be 6 up, 8 down. I don't think it's going to necessarily be 10.6%, right? Almost a 4% rise in sack rate. But I think if you're going a little more 1-to-1, or if, over the remainder of this season, instead of it being 27 and 14 touchdown to interception ratio, maybe, again, adjusted for how many games he'll play, maybe it's closer to 20 and 16, right? Or 18 and 16, something like that. I think it's just going to look different. Now, the other factor here is you didn't have Malik Neighbors. You didn't have a number 1 wide receiver when you were playing with and without Andrew Thomas since 2021. So it's a very different, using those stats. I think it does inform clearly a lot about just having a quality player like Andrew Thomas. But this is a different version of this team. And I do start to think about maybe one of the biggest factors, reflecting back on snap count, that I want to bring up here in a minute. But go ahead.
Shout out to Bobby Skinner from Talking Giants for putting
There we
that
are.
stat out yesterday. I think it's really telling. You go from a 2-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio virtually to under a 1-to-1 ratio with more than a 50% increase in sack rate.
Yeah.
It's not good. They turn the ball over, they get sacked more, and they make less yards when Andrew Thomas isn't there. But you mentioned it, Adam. When Andrew Thomas wasn't there last season, you're talking about pulling Justin Pugh off the street. We love Justin Pugh, but that is a very difficult thing for him to just go straight off the couch right into the guard position. You're talking about John Michael Schmitz being a rookie, right? And feeling a little bit overwhelmed early on, having some injury concerns. He certainly looks better. You're talking about not having John Runyon Jr. or Greg Van Roten, who have looked both very good for the Giants so far. And you're also talking about Evan Neal being the right tackle as opposed to Jermaine Illuminor, who has yet to give up a sack at the right tackle. So across the entire offensive line, the Giants have improved significantly from last season, either by increased play by current players or free agent signing. So for me, while Andrew Thomas is a crippling injury for the Giants, I expect the Giants to play better than they have in previous seasons when Andrew Thomas has not been there.
I agree with you there. And I also agree that it's going to be interesting to see what happens on the offensive line, because let's say they go with status quo and everyone stays in their position and they just plug in either Ezeudu or Evan Neal or whoever, maybe Justin Pugh off the street, whoever they bring in to the left tackle spot. You go back and you look at snap counts. Listen, Theo Johnson so far being number 2, technically sometimes on the depth chart, even though he's been playing an increased role, and we've seen him maybe actually start to have an impact on the offensive side, especially in the absence of Malik Neighbors. He played 86, 79, 81, 71, 78, and 89% of the snaps this past week, the highest total that he's had this season so far. But when you look at Manhurts, who's played about basically 24% over these last couple of weeks, has seen his percentage dip over the course of the year. We have not seen a significant increase for Daniel Bellinger. He played just 7% in week 2. He's only played in 19, and 18% of the snaps. I think the Manhurts piece of this and the overall offensive impact is going to be interesting, because I just can't see a world, if you are Brian Daboll and you are looking at this offense, how can you go into this game? We're going to do our preview for the week, with the Eagles. But how can you go into this and say Ezeudu or Neal or even Illuminor for that matter, get out there and take on the number 1, pass rusher? You can get it done. You're going to have some jumbo sets. You're going to have to hold in a tight end for blocking. And I just wonder about how it's going to shift the offensive mentality when you maybe can't have Theo Johnson on the field as often as you would like, or when you're going to have to just restrict how confident you are in running certain route combinations and trying to still, even though they struggled to this point of the season, push that ball downfield a little bit and keep the defense away from the line and away from stymieing that run game.
Well, we're going to talk about the matchup itself, but you look at something like the Philadelphia Eagles. Their defense is 25th in the league in yards per rush. They give up a lot of chunk yards on the ground. Like, the simple answer is you need to be a ground and pound team that
Yeah.
whittles away possession, that plays play action smartly and gets it in the hands of playmakers whenever you can with quick outs, bubble screens, short slants, like crossing routes. You are going to have to do whatever you can to establish the run. And Philadelphia is going to be the team that you do it against. You prefer to go against a team that struggles against the run. So you can at least say, our identity is going to be we are going to run the football no matter what.
Yeah.
And that is going to be the path that the Giants are going to have to take until we actually understand what this new offensive line is going to look like.
100%. And the other thing, just to note here too, we talk about Ezeudu or Neal, but remember, Ezeudu is getting used in very rare occasions as a jumbo set. So could both of them find their way onto the field in some of these packages when you need to make an impact for short yardage situations? Sure. You also can't overlook guys like Stinney or Kubis, right? Like there are a couple other players that we're talking about playing interior primarily, but they do have some options here, some guys that perform well. And we'll talk a little bit more maybe about practice squad players, some young guys that we liked in camp. Are they maybe going to be deserving, at least coming up from a depth perspective? So clearly, options on the table, even if they're not the best option, which is Andrew Thomas playing left tackle for the New York Giants. One more thing, since we're talking about the Philadelphia Eagles, we also give you a little glimpse ahead here, and we don't need to worry about what's going on with Saquon Barkley. He's moved on. We've moved on. Everyone's moved on. Tyrone Tracy Jr. is a better running back than he ever was. We know that now. But I don't expect a great reaction, Saquon said in his return to Giants Stadium this week. I don't expect to be booed. I look at it like this. The Philadelphia Eagles and New York Football Giants probably played in over 200 games. This rivalry was there before me, and it's going to be there after me. Maybe I'm naive, but I think it's over. That chapter's closed. He said this before the week 6, and now I truly don't care no more. I am pretty sure fans don't care no more. This is really more always your wheelhouse on this stuff, but I'll just say, and this isn't a knock on Saquon Barkley at all by any stretch. We all understand Giants could have paid him. They chose not to. There's all those semantics about it. But on this specific response to this specific question about how do you think Giants fans are going to react to you, you're missing the sports fandom mark on this one, Saquon. It doesn't matter if it had been Eli Manning that for whatever reason didn't finish his career with the Giants and he came in. He might be one of the few players, the very rare few players that could have left the Giants organization and been met with open arms upon return. You represent wrongly a massive chapter of failure for the New York Football Giants, and you went to a division rival. You're getting booed. I don't know any other way. Like 100%, I think that he's getting booed coming out here. Do you disagree with me there? Because this is way more of a fan-centric kind of take, which is usually your wheelhouse.
Well, I think that the key of that whole entire statement was Saquon saying, maybe I'm naive. I'm like, duh, you think you're maybe a little naive? Like
Maybe you are.
What planet are you on that you think that you're not going to get booed? Listen, you said this is more my wheelhouse, and it is. And you summed it up pretty good, but I will just give an explanation.
Here we go.
If Saquon Barkley went to the Houston Texans and took $15 million a year, and the Giants ended up playing the Houston Texans, I think Saquon Barkley would get 65% cheers and 35% boos, right? Like
playing against
I think
us.
I think everyone would be like, hey, listen, he took the money, he went to the AFC, he's playing in Houston, good for him. He goes to a rival. And the thing is, Saquon Barkley wanted fans to get loud when the Giants were at home and they were playing someone in their division, right?
Sure.
He wants on third down things to be loud. He wants them booing the Dallas Cowboys or the Washington Commanders or the Philadelphia Eagles. Adam, he's wearing a Philadelphia Eagles jersey, and it wasn't like he got outright released by the Giants like James Bradbury kind of did, and he went to the Eagles, and it's fine. It's like he decided to take more money from the Philadelphia Eagles than he did from the New York Giants. For him to think that the Giant fans aren't going to boo, the last thing I will say, fan is short for fanatic. They don't play for the team. They weren't in the locker room playing poker with him on team flights. Like, I'm sure his friends on the team still love and respect him. I'm sure the front office will give him great big hugs, but he is wearing a Philadelphia Eagles jersey, and every time he touches the ball, he's going to get booed. So for him to think that like there's some random subset of the fans that it's like, no, we can't boo Saquon Barkley because him playing for the Giants is more important than him being a Philadelphia Eagle currently, is just absolutely ludicrous.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up for me. And again, this isn't a knock on Saquon Barkley. I think
No,
we were, among the more tempered, when it comes to covering the offseason, the contracts, and everything else. I'm not a guy that I do
take
not
the
boo in
money.
general. I'm not
Take
going to
the
be
money.
booing. I wouldn't be booing if I was there. You'll be there, and you're not going to be booing Saquon Barkley. But in this instance, if you think you might be naive, let me confirm you are in fact being naive. Incidentally, shout out to Jordan Renan. He asked the question. He ran the poll. Will Saquon Barkley get booed by Giants fans on Sunday? Hey, yes, of course, 87.8%. And also, he gave the clarifying information around Andrew Thomas, which we already knew, but he'll be back for OTAs. That is the timeline for his return on when he'll be ready to get back out there. That's not OTAs, mid-season OTAs. That's not late season OTAs. That is next year's OTAs. So now it's just, we hate to say it, but out of sight, out of mind. We will have to put Andrew Thomas behind us and focus on what the Giants can do as Andy closes us out today.
At the end of the day, the Andrew Thomas injury is debilitating for this season. You mentioned he's going to come back healthy, presumably through OTAs. Adam, the contract is still very, very favorable for the Giants. He is still under contract for 3 more seasons for the Giants. 21 million, 21 million, 23 million. They have an
Yeah.
out after the second year. So if like he continues to have debilitating injuries and he just can't stay healthy, there are contingency plans, but he is an affordable left tackle that, when healthy, can play at an all-pro level. We hope he rests up. There's no reason for him to come back earlier or try to force things. Get healthy, get better, and let's hope the Giants can beat the Philadelphia Eagles without him.
If you guys are watching us on YouTube, as we hope you are, and we hope you're subscribing and turning on alerts so you know when we go live, a little wrinkle this week and probably going for the season. Other injury updates, more in depth on Malik Neighbors. Where's Devin Singletary's groin stand right now? We also heard about Brian Burns coming out of this game, right? Where does all that stand? Go over to the podcast feed, because in between our YouTube episodes, that's where we're going to give you those little bonus updates on that side of things. You'll be able to hear that on Thursday, and then coming back in on Friday, we'll turn our full attention to what our expectations are for this upcoming matchup with the Philadelphia Eagles, and whether or not this is another prime spot like 2 weeks ago against Seattle, where all expectations go out the door for Big Blue and they surprise us with, by the way, their first home victory in the process. We'll go ahead and continue to break all things down on OGP, podcast feed, YouTube feed, sponsors. Do it all for us. We greatly appreciate it. Until next time, until the best times. As Andrew Mackwitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.